the rules of life. And these rules of life are the guides by which energy, life energy, is directed, controlled, and released gradually and properly in the unfoldment and evolution of living things. So we can try for the one thing that the Bible has told us, namely to be still and know. This is Zen. Zen is to be still and allow the rules to work, to keep out of the way of our own best good, as we term it today. We must gradually come to the condition and point where we permit natural laws to work their own ways. Now, this does not mean a blind acceptance of hunches or mysterious motions or feelings within ourselves. We need to be disciplined. We need to know what we are doing. But we must prepare ourselves to obey rules that we are now completely ignoring. One way is to help this out would be to get a better educational knowledge of the abilities and liabilities of human life. We should know more about the human being, what he can do and what he can't do. We should understand better the structure of his body and its relation to his consciousness, his mind, his soul, and his spirit. We need to find out what constitutes a true normalcy. A normalcy in the face of heaven, and not normalcy among the abnormalcies of human beings. If we can find out the basic pattern of what is best for us, we can then begin to build. Now, many people feel that they have tried to live according to what was best for themselves. But then again, if the level of interpretation was not high enough, if the best was not good enough to provide survival, then the best is not worthy of very much attention. The best must be that which is closest to reality, not that which is closest to self-satisfaction. We must become more and more aware that that which is best for all is also best for us, and that we are no longer simply separate entities struggling for survival like a number of bugs in a water barrel. We are more than this. We are creatures living together, bearing witness to millions of years of growth and development. Creatures so incredible that no scientist has ever been able to truly understand the structure of the human body. So remarkable in its mentations that the processes of the mind remain unsolved mysteries. And also with bodies so extraordinary that no machine ever created by the human being can approach them. Bodies that depend upon miracles performed every day for survival. Bodies that are moved by energies which we have not been able to really discover, and which will serve us well if we keep faith with them. All of this is part of a contemplative life. And a contemplative life begins by smoothing out everything that might cause waste, that anything that is lost through excess of attitudes. Therefore, it is not wise for the individual to physically over-exercise because he is using too much energy. Socrates was approached on this problem once, and he said he would never walk or take a walk unless he was going somewhere. The idea of going around the block 50 times never occurred to the old Greek, and yet he was strong enough so that when he was in battle, the enemy separated and went on each side of him. They didn't face him. So, physically moderate and right, rhythmic, not excessive. Every part of physical motion should be more or less dominated by artistry. The human body is a magnificent thing, and it is particularly wonderful to the artist who knows how to use it. The body is something that requires a tremendous amount of aesthetic understanding and the most delightful and possible protections of all of the functions and properties of the body. So if the body is not overtaxed, it will in an emergency rise to almost any occasion. A body that has been properly taken care of then becomes a strong help in time of trouble, whereas a body that has been worn out with nuisance values is of very little use to the individual who owns it or anyone else. Then we go into the emotional life of individuals. Emotional energy is more subtle than physical, but it is of the same quality. There is a mysterious nuclear fission of the emotional atom. It is subject, the same as the physical, to a tremendous amount of research to understand its way of function, what it really is, how much it can do, and where its boundaries are. All possible means should be used to make sure that the emotional energy does not come into conflict with the physical. If the emotional comes in, there is a tyranny, because the physical cannot cope with the emotional. That is always at a disadvantage which is lower, and the physical is lower in its processes than the emotional. So the emotion is a guardian of physical health. And when it ceases to be a guardian and simply uses the body to satisfy or gratify its emotional propensities, it is then a dictator, a militarist, an anarchist, tearing down the union of the parts which make up the human personality. So we take the emotional nature and find that there are two general kinds of emotions, those that enrich and those that impoverish. Everything that is unpleasant, negative, unfair, unreasonable, selfish, self-centered, over-ambitious, and so forth, all these things are misuses of emotional energy. Whereas love of beauty, kindness, friendship, affection, cooperation, these are emotional virtues. And these virtues protect the physical body because the superior has the power to improve that which is inferior. But the inferior cannot rebel effectively against the superior. So we have in the emotional level what would be called in the meditative discipline the need for the gradual relaxation of stress. Now that you can fight an emotional stress, you can fight it by more emotional stress. You can use all kinds of disciplines to whip it into action as though it were an animal trainer. But at the same time, none of these things will work effectively because they simply create more energy extravagance. The simple answer is if you just quiet down, you don't need any other remedy. If you just simply relax away from pressure, not in any sense of the word neglecting a proper duty, not giving up important emotional commitments, but simply wasting no emotion on negative attitudes. All negative attitudes have destructive effect upon the physical body, and the notional attitudes of millions of people have also a tremendously detrimental effect upon the emotional nature of the planet. They create wars, revolutions, despotisms, and anarchies. They turn people against each other. They justify war, rebellion, and catastrophe. These are all more or less dependent upon lack of emotional integrity. So that we can look around us and see how important it is that we really try to keep the emotional nature under some type of reasonable control. Once we begin to control it, we find it's rather nice. We find that it's much nicer to be happy than miserable, and that we have less to burden us if we forgive than if we continue to nurse grudges. If we keep our minds off of ourselves and no longer suffer from self-pity, we have a new contentment rising in our own natures. And all of these processing together make physical life more stable. They give us greater securities. They give us more friends that can be useful and helpful. They make us more charitable and also more welcome in the lives of those around us. Emotional attitudes, therefore, should be watched. And the next time irritation rises up, drop into the Zen attitude. Be very quiet. And allow some relaxation to move in on you. Instead of building it up and adding by imagination to the fault that is already overabundant. Keep quiet, or very gently try to understand the good behind the situation. If somebody annoys you, be quiet for a moment and realize that this is an opportunity not to be annoyed. And that when you are able to make most of that opportunity, you have had a marvelous lesson in self-discipline. So wherever anything happens that would almost certainly cause you to be excited or displeased, realize that this is a test, a kind of an initiation, and that if you are able to pass this test, you have stepped forward in the real development of your own humanity. So we have the emotions by means of which the body can be protected or persecuted. And then we proceed on to the mind, and here we really have a tricky fellow. The mind is a center of self-justification. The mind is forever telling us that we're right, whether we are or not. And the mind is also forever telling us that we're entitled to anything that we want, and this is also untrue. The mind tells us that we are living in a fun generation, but the mind is a liar because very few people are having any fun. We are told that we should have anything we want, but all we get out of this is an exaggeration of our desires. We want more. The more we get, the more we want, and when it comes to the final end of things, we leave it all behind. The mind has become a servant of our pleasures. It has found ways to contrive the justification of almost anything that we want. The mind tells us whatever we think we need. And it also helps us constantly to build false pictures of our environments and our relationships with other people. The mind, therefore, is lazy. Very few minds really want to think. What they really want to do is to scheme. They want to jump at some conclusion. They want to back up an emotional attitude. They want to say to you or to themselves that the emotions say, I must have it. The mind says, well, then you probably better get it. And the result is emotion plus mind equals bankruptcy. All these things we have to take into consideration, yet the mind is not so bad. The mind also is an atom that can be split. It has tremendous energy potentials. In fact, we are wasting mental energy even more rapidly than any other kind. Because wherever we use a faculty or a function without training it, without giving it proper boundaries, without understanding what we're doing, we're working a hardship upon that faculty itself. So the mind today is behind our politics, behind our international intrigues, behind all these various colossal projects of mankind, which really mean nothing. The mind gives us a world which is a little better than a castle in a sandbox. The mind as we use it today would have been appropriate to the requirements of the average 8-year-old child, but it's not equivalent to the needs of the moment. So the mind has to be given the time to cool off, quiet down, and be released also from the pressures of emotions or the constant nervous tensions of the body. The mind is a kind of a gentle creature, a teacher. It is the old sage, but it is also one of those conservative creatures that tries to justify anything we want. It is constantly catering to often the worst part of ourselves. Another thing that the mind can do is to substitute involved thinking for knowledge, which is not the same. They're not the same thing. The mind, for instance, has given a science, and science is a branch of learning that tells us everything except what we want to know. And here it falls down. And if we become really learned in science, we become a professor, we write textbooks on the subject, and we gain a good reputation. But when it's all said and done, we're almost in the same place that we were before. The values, the great lessons, the mysteries of existence, which are the primary subject of human need, are not there. Therefore, the individual becomes locked within a little intellectual universe, made largely of his own thinking, and intended largely for the gratification of his own instincts and attitudes. On one occasion,